Well, it was a day of even more testing. Um, it was vGraph, status, patch, and test. That was what I worked on today. So we in status, that was pretty straightforward. Um, I still have a question about boundary nodes, and I'm going to talk about boundary nodes in a minute. But pretty basic. It's 300 lines of tests. Patch, because so much of patch is covered elsewhere, it was fairly straightforward, and it's actually a really simple piece. But patch is covered a lot by commit, so that's why it's a little bit shorter because it uses some of the same internal code in a nice internal method. Just make sure things are deleted and cloning from a source graph into a destination graph and applying patches back and forth, things like that. And then commit. Commit was the beast. Still have stuff that I should test, or I could test, but it's not really critically important. But it's a test that would be good to put in there, especially for regression purposes. But the bear of the tests, I'm wondering if I'm putting too much stuff in single test cases. For instance, this commit is testing the creation of proper commit nodes and edges. So every time you commit, it creates a new commit node, and then it rearranges the pointers so that the previous commit points to the current previous commit, and then this one points to the root node, and then it deletes the edge at the end. So it's like, make sure you have no commit nodes. Create the first commit, make sure everything's in line. Commit 2, make sure everything's pointing to each other correctly. Commit 3, which isn't labeled right. Botch that. Commit 3, make sure everything's pointing to the correct. All the pointers are ending up correctly. It's just a lot of really long. It's some long test cases. Goodness, that wore me out this morning. It's kind of a sprint. Just like go, must finish. But that was good. It brought up a couple. Where are they? There they are. Pieces of paper floating around in my office again. Some interesting things with boundary nodes. So the purpose of boundary node is to mark the edge of your graph and where it connects to someone else's graph. So creating boundary nodes should only be done through patching, because you're taking a piece of their graph and sticking it in. You should never really say this points to that over there without going and getting that thing and coming back. You really shouldn't be updating it because it has no properties. Because you cannot change, or because ID and label are immutable, they're copied over, but everything else is not. And then the question is delete. Delete is one of the things that I've really kind of wondered about and gone back and forth on. I need to make a final decision. Is, can you delete a boundary node in your own graph? And initially I was thinking no. And the reasoning behind that, I didn't do a good enough job of recording it, if I had one. I can't, as I go through it, I can't really find a good reason to disallow the just deletion of a boundary node. It's like, I don't want to point to that graph anymore. Nuke. I don't know. I don't know. So I need to really think through that. I'm thinking yes, and if that's true, and I can delete a boundary node, then I'm gonna have a bunch of code I got to change in. Well, not a bunch, but I got to change some code in a couple places because I'm disallowing that, and I got to handle. You got to be able to handle that case, especially with deleting boundary nodes in commits and applying those commits to the graphs. So if you delete a commit a boundary node, it needs to delete the boundary node. So things like that. The other thing is you can potentially get into a situation where you have a boundary node that is for your own repository. And that can come about when you clone a boundary node in, or you get a boundary node that points to a graph, and then next time you start up that graph instance, it's set differently. You initialize it with a different repo that happens to be the same. And it's really kind of bizarre. The question is, should that be allowed? And what does that really mean? Does it mean point to yourself and keep on going, or does it mean there's another copy out there somewhere? There's some stuff like that still hasn't quite been figured out. I need to, that may not be figured out right now until we're actually using it and such. And there's also the case where if you create an edge and then you run something like status or you run commit, the commit coming out of there will have boundary nodes pointing to your own graph or your own instance, because you only change the edge and you just keep track of the nodes when you do the add. So because of that, you end up with commits that have the same repository as, or the commit has the same repository that the commit node, boundary node, has. So I think that should be okay. It just means that I had an interim edit. So there's a few things like that that I have to sit down, figure out, really think through. But the nice thing is we're to a point where we're thinking little nitpicky corner cases that, as long as you handle them sanely, there really is no right or wrong answer right now. Once you hit a 1.0, there is a right answer, but for now, it can be a little loosey-goosey. So, just working on that, chugging away. 1.5 more days of, 1.5 more half days of, or 2/3 days, however it is, whatever, of vGraph. So tomorrow is clone, copy, and undo. Clone and copy out should be really easy to test. And undo should be easy to test as long as I implemented it correctly. And that's going to be the kicker. Is doing all those checks to, okay, operate on vGraph up here, and then check on the underlying graph to make sure everything's being done and undone and created and deleted properly. So I think it'll work. It's working well. So we'll just kind of have to see what happens. Yeah, I had to touch the vGraph API several times today as well. I've got a giant list of questions that keeps on growing, of things I need to think about this. You may want to do this. You may want to allow this. So that's what it is. Have a great day and take care and have some fun.